afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Michael McLendon. It's my great pleasure to serve as Interim Provost at Baylor University. It's also even more so a great honor today to welcome you to this special convening, this symposium on academic flourishing. Thank you for joining us for this special symposium that will highlight the work and the views of some of Baylor's most distinguished faculty into human flourishing. The Christian conception of flourishing encompasses all aspects of our being: intellectual, emotional, psychological, spiritual. Likewise, one of the distinctives of Baylor University is the intentionality with which we work to cultivate a culture that can promote flourishing, the flourishing of students, yes, but also of faculty and staff throughout our larger community. Unquestionably, concern for human flourishing is at the very heart of the Christian Manifesto. And so it's fitting that leading academicians here at Baylor are seeking to discover how we can improve the conditions for flourishing at Baylor and the flourishing of human condition more broadly. The timing of our symposium today, of course, is no accident. Dr. Linda A. Livingstone, who will be inaugurated tomorrow as our university's 15th president, has renewed Baylor's focus on the academic enterprise. In addition to her commitment to a vibrant and caring environment for our students, she's launched an academic strategic planning process that will serve as a roadmap for the coming generation. In the context of an unwavering commitment to our faith tradition and to the strengths we already possess as a university that seeks to transform the lives of students, we've begun asking the questions: how can Baylor deepen the impact of its scholarship and research in the world around us? In what new and creative ways should the university invest as it considers how best it can contribute to and engage with the larger academic enterprise of our nation and of our world? In 10 to 20 years' time, what problems in our world do we want Baylor scholars and researchers to have contributed leading solutions? A noted researcher in her own academic field, Dr. Livingstone places a high value on the discovery of new knowledge and the pursuit of creative endeavors. She's a champion for the collaborative work of faculty to find lasting solutions to important issues facing our world today. Over these past months working with Linda, I've had the opportunity, the privilege in fact, to come to know her, and here are a few of the insights that you won't necessarily read in her bio contained in today's program. First, she's preternaturally positive and hopeful, and frequently reminds us that our God is larger than the constraints we assume must exist for us. She's deeply committed to the unique mission of our university. She has energy and drive and enthusiasm that are more than equal to the task of leading this university at this historic moment in its life. President Livingstone has a deep regard and an abiding respect for the work of faculty in all the forms that work takes. In the form of teaching, yes, and in the form of service to communities and to the world around us, and also to the pursuit of scholarship that is meaningful, impactful, and enduring. Would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Linda Livingstone.
Thank you, Provost McLendon, for that wonderful introduction. It is wonderful to have all of you here as we continue our Inauguration Week activities. We began yesterday with a couple of student activities, including Dr. Pepper Hour, and then last night, Brad and I, Brad, would you wave? Where's Brad? Somewhere, wave, there's Brad. We hosted a dinner on our lawn at the Albritton House and had somewhere north of 4,000 students who came and had dinner with us last night. So it was quite an experience and a lot of fun, and we took more pictures than we ever thought that we could in a 2-hour span of time. But it's been a wonderful week, and this event, this symposium on human flourishing is especially important. As we were beginning to plan inauguration activities when I first arrived in June, we began reflecting on what it was we really wanted to do this week, and certainly engaging our students was an important part of that. But we also talked about how do we really highlight the academic enterprise, and part of that discussion was, well, we could bring in some noted scholars from other institutions and profile what they're doing and have them reflect on some of the things that we think are important at Baylor. But the more we talked about it, the more we concluded, you know, as we aspire to be a top-tier research university while strengthening our commitment as a Christian institution, what better way to do that than during Inauguration Week to profile some of our own preeminent faculty who are doing significant research that is making a difference in the world. And that's what we chose to do. And so today, and then at the lunch tomorrow, you will see a sampling of some of our really exceptional faculty that are doing some of the most interesting, impactful work that you will see. And we recognize we have many, many faculty that fit this category, and so what you will see today and tomorrow is a sampling of that. So appreciate you being here. Look forward to enjoying this event with you, and I want to thank our panelists for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to be a part of this and to be a part of this wonderful event today. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the symposium.
Thank you, President Livingstone. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our symposium panelists representing 4 fields of study. Each panelist brings a distinct viewpoint to the conversation about factors that impact human flourishing. Please find their full bios in the program, and I'll say just a few words about each of them. To begin, Dr. Beverly Roberts-Gaventa, Distinguished Professor of Religion in Baylor University's College of Arts and Sciences. Dr. Gaventa holds a PhD from Duke University and is known as a leading New Testament scholar. She was most recently on faculty at Princeton Theological Seminary before joining Baylor in 2013. Dr. Dwayne Simmons is the Cornelia Marshall Smith Endowed Professor and Chair of the Department of Biology in Baylor University's College of Arts and Sciences. Professor Simmons has his PhD from Harvard. He is an expert cellular and molecular mechanisms, expert associated with hearing loss in the brain and inner ear. He was most recently on faculty at UCLA before joining Baylor in 2015. Dr. Dawn Carlson, who holds the H.R. Gibson Chair of Organizational Development in Baylor University's Hankamer School of Business. Dr. Carlson has a PhD from Florida State University, and she is known as an expert on the intersections of work and family life. And prior to joining Baylor in 1999, she was on the faculty at the University of Utah. Lastly, not leastly, Dr. Byron Johnson, Distinguished Professor of Social Sciences at Baylor, is the founding director of the Baylor Institute for Studies of Religion. Dr. Johnson has his PhD from Florida State University. He's recognized as an expert on the scientific study of religion and society. And prior to joining Baylor in 2004, he was on the faculty at Vanderbilt University and at the University of Pennsylvania. Our format for today's symposium will include a brief overview from each panelist as they share highlights of their research. And following these remarks, we'll explore the subject through a guided discussion. I'd first like to begin our conversation today with some brief orienting, welcoming remarks by Dr. Beverly Gaventa.
Good afternoon. First, on behalf of my fellow panelists, let me say, Madam President, that we are delighted to mark your inauguration with this conversation. In addition, I want to thank Provost McLendon for inviting us to participate. It's a privilege to be here. The task of the biblical scholar is very simple. It is to enhance our reading and understanding of Scripture. To do that, we borrow. We borrow from several other disciplines in the university. First, of course, we need ancient languages. We have to know Hebrew and Greek and often Aramaic and Latin in order simply to read the texts themselves. We draw on literary criticism and classics in order to understand how our texts work. How do the narratives of Scripture unfold? How are arguments made in the ancient world? And how does Scripture reflect those methods of argumentation? We draw on history and anthropology and archaeology to place our texts in the worlds in which they were written. What we glean from those disciplines contributes to understanding the emergence and development of Christianity. But biblical scholarship is not simply a parochial activity. Our work contributes to our understanding also of the development of Judaism. More generally, biblical scholars help us to understand how religion contributes to human flourishing, contributes to our shared humanity. A single example may give these generalizations some life. Some years ago, I was reading Galatians 4:19, where Paul writes, "My little children, I am in labor with you again until Christ be formed in you." The line, for some reason, struck me, so I picked a commentary from my shelf. I turned to the appropriate spot, and I read that here, as in several other places, the Apostle Paul uses paternal, yes, P-A, paternal imagery in relationship to his work with his churches. Going back to the Greek, I confirmed what Paul had said was indeed, I am in labor with you. And the English means exactly what it seems to mean, that Paul was in the process of giving birth. That gap between what the text says and what a commentary had said led me to my shelves again, to the library, and to a lengthy engagement with this extraordinary passage, where the Apostle Paul speaks the words of a woman in the process of giving birth. Now, that is not the only oddity in this passage. He also says he is in labor again and with the same children. Yet he doesn't actually give birth, but he says Christ will be formed in you. In order to make sense of that odd remark, I looked at ancient philosophical texts in case there might be parallels. I read in metaphor theory to get a help with how metaphors work and what they do. I read about understandings of masculinity in the Roman world, and I explored the history of interpretation to see how our predecessors had understood this passage. The resulting work sent me to other passages in Paul's letters where he also uses maternal language. This resulted in a series of articles and eventually a book entitled Our Mother, St. Paul. In that book, I argued, among other things, that Paul's use of this imagery raises questions about some of the ways in which we typically talk about him. He was not a dominating great man who strode onto the scene of the first century. He was actually far more vulnerable than he is often given credit for being. His identification in these texts with female roles is strikingly countercultural, and he was far more comfortable with the female than he is often credited with being. Now, that small contribution of mine started, frankly, out of irritation with a previous scholar, has had a considerable afterlife. I know of several dissertations and monographs that have been written prompted by my work. And I'm aware that more recent commentators on Galatians and other of Paul's letters have taken note of Paul's maternal imagery. That in itself is very gratifying. It's always good to find yourself in a footnote. But what is most rewarding is that when I have talked with people about these texts, I have time and again heard the response, I never noticed that before. Or, I never thought about those passages before. What else might I be missing? And that's how a biblical scholar, or at least this biblical scholar, hopes to enhance our reading of Scripture and hopes in turn to enhance our understanding of the God who encounters us in those Scriptures. Now, let me call on my colleague, Dr. Dwayne Simmons.
I've been fascinated with the brain ever since I can ever remember. The brain is so amazing in terms of what it does for us as human beings, obviously. We think, we take in sounds and images, we smell, all of those sensations get filtered in through our sensory systems and then are processed in very unique ways in our brains. Now, that fascination that I've had since childhood with the brain basically boils down to three questions. I've been fascinated with the brain in terms of all of the sensory aspects and sensory experiences that I had as a child. I remember waking up in the mornings, especially on Saturdays, to the smell of coffee, even though I really hate the taste of coffee. I remember as a child being really fascinated by and asking the question, how do we see colors? How do we hear pitch? How much do our brains talk to our immune systems when we're sick? My research is focused on how our sensory systems basically get connected together with our brains. My research is also focused on the question of how do our sensory systems respond when they are overloaded and stressed. And thirdly, my research is about, or at least asks the question, how does the immune system and the brain actually talk to each other? You can think of the first question as being one of wiring. When I was a young scientist, I made a really interesting discovery. I discovered that there was this massive system in our brain that sent projections from the brain to the inner ears. Previous scientists had thought that that was due to a kind of like a not miswiring, but a, how should we say, wrong wiring of the brain diagram. The insight that I was able to bring to this was that that massive projection that descended out to the inner ears very early on, it would be about the equivalent of when you are roughly about 25 weeks old in your mother's womb, that massive massive projection to the inner ear is one that is very important for helping to set up what becomes the wiring diagram of that inner ear. We've been doing some current research with my collaborators at the University of Sheffield, where we have actually looked at how calcium signals in the early sensory system that are set up by this massive projection very early on from the brain to the inner ear actually helps to make sure that the wiring in the sensory system is correct. When that wiring is not correct, then the organism does not hear. A second question that my research focuses on is basically in the guise of sensory overload. What happens when we are overloaded with sounds? Well, right now, about a quarter of Americans, about 25% of Americans between the ages of 20 to 69, 70 years old, actually have some significant hearing loss. And what's fascinating about this, and I tell my students actually that I want them to continue to do this thing, what's fascinating is that most of this hearing loss that we're experiencing right now, people are not aware of it. They're not aware of the lack of ability to hear certain sounds. 25%. We conjecture a lot of that's because we have very noisy environments. Now, as noisy environments, right now, I always carry a handy sound level meter on my phone. I'm the ultimate kind of geek. And when one looks at a noisy environment, right now my speech is running at about 70 to 75 dB SPL, which is considered to be somewhat of a loud and annoyance kind of sound. Now, I tell my students, I want you to keep doing this one thing, and that is, keep wearing those earbuds in your ears, keep blasting the sound as loud as you can. And the reason for doing that is because I want a job for the next 20 years. Now, what we know about sensory overload in the inner ear is that we've been making some discoveries about how there is a role for what are called buffers. And these are proteins that actually mop up excess calcium ions and sodium ions and potassium ions in our inner ears. And what we have discovered by engineering mice that do not have these proteins is that these mice have incredible sensitivity and vulnerability to noise. And not only that, they also experience accelerated age-related hearing loss. And so a mouse normally loses its hearing around 18 months, not necessarily in the field because they would probably be preyed upon. But in the lab, a mouse will lose its hearing around 18 months. When they lack these particular buffers that we have taken out of the mouse, then they will lose their hearing at about 4 months, or maybe even as early as 3 months old. So a very significant decrement in their hearing capability. And the third area that we have been addressing in our laboratory is how the brain and the immune system actually communicate and talk. This is a very fundamental issue. Ask anyone who's had any kind of spinal cord injury and has lost the ability to walk or to use both their arms and legs. And with a collaborator up in Cleveland at Case Western Reserve Medical School, we have been investigating the role of the immune cells, in particular the macrophages and and other immune cells, and how they actually communicate with the neurons once a neuron has suffered damage, such as a nerve crush or a transection. We call it an exotomy. And what we found is that we've, again, engineered some mice where they lack a single gene that is found in macrophages and actually found in only certain cells within the inner ear. But the lack of that one gene causes the macrophages to ignore the axons that have been severed or that have been crushed from the spinal cord. And what we hope to do and hope to show is that by just restoring that one gene back to these animals, we can actually restore the ability of peripheral nerves to actually regenerate. So as a child, I was interested in the brain and how it perceived and saw all of these amazing inputs coming into it. And as an adult and as a scientist, we've been working on trying to make sure that we understand this in a way in which we can actually help others, those who suffer from hearing loss, from overload of sounds, and those who suffer from damage to their spinal cords. Thank you.
How many times a week do you have to juggle between a work and a family event? For most people, it's a daily occurrence. There are times when work and family are in conflict with each other. For example, when you have to be two places at once. And there are times where work and family enrich one another. For example, when the fact that you're a parent makes you a better manager or vice versa. And yet still there's times where you feel like you're simply trying to keep all the balls in the air and you're juggling and trying to find some balance between work and family. The focus of my research is the intersection between work and family lives. So, who of you has a mobile device? My guess is everyone. And they're great, right? They help us do all kinds of things. And in fact, I didn't even know they could be sound meters. But they can help us do all kinds of things, right? Like check the weather and stay in touch with people and take pictures. But they're not always good. And in fact, my recent research looked at the effects of mobile device use for work during family time and found that when you're constantly tethered to work during your family time, that causes some problems. We looked at for job incumbents when that happens, it contributes to their burnout and employee turnover. We also looked at dual careers and found that when this interference occurs, that it crosses over to the spouse, and it causes the spouse to have more relationship tension, and it affects their job performance and satisfaction. But the most interesting part of our study was that we found when this kind of mobile device use happens, that it creates resentment in the spouse towards the job incumbent's organization. So in the end, it's not the person using the mobile device that contributes greatest to their desire to stay or not stay with the organization, but the spouse. So think twice before you ask an employee to check an email over the weekend, or think twice before you take your phone and to dinner and respond to a text. The inability to separate work and family time due to the ubiquitous nature of mobile device use comes at a cost, not only to you, but to your family and the organizations you work for. Learning to set boundaries around work and family domains so that you can fully engage in each domain when you're in it can contribute to human flourishing. My passion as a researcher resides in understanding the many dimensions of work and family life. We know that people who are fulfilled personally make better contributions to the organizations, but the reality is individuals, families, and organizations are all quite complex systems, requiring me to study them from many different perspectives. My work helps define the workplace conditions under which humans can flourish, and I truly believe that we as humans, created in the image of God, can reach our true potential and flourish. A second study I want to share with you today is my recent work on work-family deviant behavior. So, how many of you, wait, not you, let's pretend a friend, somebody you know, has engaged in behaviors such as, let's say, they called into work sick when they were really healthy, or they left work early without permission. Work-family deviance looks at prioritizing family above work in a way that's violating organizational norms. Now, sometimes people do this because of the pressures they get in the work environment, or because they simply feel like they'll be penalized for prioritizing family. And still others simply feel like they need to get their time with family no matter what the cost, and they're willing to do whatever they need to, even if it requires some deceit. But what the research shows is this kind of behavior not only creates a bad atmosphere for the organization, but it has consequences for the individual in terms of emotional exhaustion from continually having to engage in deceitful behaviors. This is just one example which highlights how important it is for organizations to create an atmosphere that is conducive to helping people manage work and family demands. Both organizational policies and individual decisions are critical to enabling employees and their families to flourish. These are just two of over 75 studies that I've published at my time at Baylor, which help us to understand how the two worlds of work and family intertwine. My hope is that my research helps organizations set policies and create cultures that are supportive and family-friendly. My hope is that my research helps individuals be better able to manage the competing demands of work and family and able to capitalize on the fact that they're engaged in multiple demand. And my hope is that my work helps people lead better lives and flourish no matter where they are. Now we save the best for last, and next is Byron Johnson.
Thanks, Dawn. It's a pleasure to be here today. Crime, delinquency, drug addiction. These are not necessarily popular topics, but they are things that I'm used to studying, because I think there's a way in which religion is related to all of these things and might be able to help us come up with some solutions. I'd like to talk about a recent study that we just completed that took place at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, which is the largest maximum security prison in America with over 6,000 inmates. The vast majority of these 6,000 inmates are serving life. And when I say life, I mean life without parole. They will die at this prison. The prison is also referred to as Angola, just the one word. The reason why is the prison is located on an 18,000-acre farm that used to be a slave plantation, and the slaves were from Angola, Africa. For many, many years, this has been known as the most violent and the most corrupt prison in America. It's the one job that no one would want to have, to be the warden of this facility. But in 1995, Burl King got the call to be warden of this institution, and he thought, what will I do? There's virtually no programs, no work programs or vocational programs. Educational programs have been cut. What am I going to do with inmates being stabbed almost every single day? He thought, why don't we start a Bible college in the prison? You know, that would be something that would be a unique idea. So in 1995, they signed an agreement with the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary to launch a 4-year curriculum in a maximum security prison, all privately funded. I began to hear things about this prison over the next decade or so, but most of these things I heard like on Christian radio. I heard nothing in the academic world about it. Then in 2011, here at Baylor, I got a phone call one day from this very warden. Now, he's from Louisiana. And if any of you are familiar with the dreadful TV show Dukes of Hazzard, it was actually Boss Hogg that called me. I couldn't understand hardly a word he said on the phone, but there was something like, why don't I get any respect for what we're doing here? And I said, well, most people need to have hard data rather than anecdotes. He had just read a book I had written called More God, Less Crime that outlined how religion actually does make a difference in the lives of so many people and can keep them out of trouble. And he said, well, what would we need to do to prove the point? I said, well, we would need to do a rigorous academic study that would take a long time. And he goes, well, let's do that. We got a grant for 5 years and began that study, and we finished it about a month ago. It's been a remarkable study. We've had a team of 5 people on the ground doing surveys and in-depth interviews with inmates over the last 5 years. We have observed for months on location, and it has resulted in at least 10 journal articles, many more coming out, and a new book called The Angola Prison Seminary. Here's what we found briefly. Inmates who attend the Bible college, as you might expect, are much less likely to get in trouble. And they're much more likely to be involved in what we would call pro-social behavior or positive behavior. But there's also something going on at Angola that's another unique factor, and that is they have inmate-led congregations, 29 of them. These are independent churches with complete church staffs, all led by inmates. No other prison in America has such a thing. We found that inmates who participate in these congregations are also less likely to be in trouble and likely to be helping other inmates. But the inmates who do better than anybody else are those that attend the Bible college and attend these congregations. By the way, these congregations are Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Catholic. It's one of the most ecumenical environments that you would ever see. Suicide down, violence down, assaults down across the board. These inmate ministers now are being transferred to other prisons as missionaries. They've created a hospice unit, since they're all dying there, where inmates take care of the aged. They've created sidewalk counseling, grief counseling as they lose family members on the outside. They do the funerals. Many of the staff actually attend the churches led by the inmates, and their families are allowed to come in and worship with them. So in the middle of the swamps of Louisiana, you now have correctional leaders and policymakers from around the U.S. and indeed around the world coming to find out what's happening in this backward place. And we've had the pleasure of documenting that in this new book. We've also written popular essays and opinion editorials because we want the news to be read by people other than academics. And this is just one of many projects that I think are so special for a place like Baylor because we understand how to study something like faith. I will just say this in passing too, we've just wrapped up simultaneously a series of studies in Ohio looking at drug treatment programs that are faith-based. And we've also published about 10 papers there. And the findings are remarkably similar. And that is, inmates or offenders who find God do well in treatment. But inmates or offenders who find God and serve others in treatment, that's the ticket to sobriety, faith and service. So what we found in Angola, we found in Ohio, that faith and service matters, and isn't it special that at a place like Baylor, faith and service matters as well? Thank you.
Colleagues, welcome. It is so good to be here with you and to enjoy your personal statements, your opening statements. Now, just among the five of us, I'm the happiest person in the room today. You wouldn't know this necessarily, but in the course, in the context of the daily life of a provost, it's an unmitigated joy to sit with four colleagues as distinguished as you and to talk about what it is that you do and what formed you and why it is that you do what you do. And I have a couple of questions that we wanted to explore today. The first is this, Dr. Gaventa Beverly, what inspired you to take up your particular field, and how would you describe that in terms of a calling, a vocational calling?
Well, I certainly do think it's a calling. I met my calling in a place I didn't want to be. I had enrolled for a master's program in theology, and they required me to take a course on the New Testament, which I did not want to take. I had had undergraduate work in the Bible, and I didn't like it. And so there I was, recalcitrant, and I met a teacher for whom the New Testament was the most important, most interesting thing in the world. And by virtue of watching him over the course of the semester, engrossed in the Greek New Testament, and inviting all of us to sit alongside and asking us what we saw and what we heard and what we would say about it, I discovered that's what I was supposed to do. And I've been doing it ever since.
Ever since. Ones of you, others of you, how would you respond to that? Why do you do what you do, and how do you describe it or think of it in terms of a vocational calling?
I'd like to go with that. For me, I had a teacher, and this was at Pepperdine, who just loved the natural world. And one of the things that he kind of shared with me and helped me to understand was how important it was to really try to understand that world about us. His name is Steve Davis. He actually was a Cherry Fellow here about 1 decade ago. But he was just an amazing teacher. And for me, that was so important. He helped me to understand several things. One, I did ecological research with him, ecology research, out in a marine environment. I was a city kid. I had never been to an ocean or to a marine estuary in my life. And I'm out there in the mud, sandy mud, working with him side by side. It was amazing to do that. Now, I also discovered that I was not cut out to be an ecologist. I am a city kid, and that is why I went into the lab. But he actually allowed me to go into the lab and to explore and investigate and engage science head on. And he was a very strong Christian. And that, to me, was like just putting a nail into what it was that I wanted to do and be.
Thank you. Dawn?
Well, when I graduated from Baylor as an undergrad in the late 80s, I went to work for a consulting firm in Houston, and there was lots of long hours, and I kept noticing all these people having to have family responsibilities that they couldn't meet. I had a boss who came into work just hours after his child was born. I had saw other people that had to cancel family vacations, or a guy was in charge of a Boy Scout troop and they had to cancel that, all because things were in conflict. They got called into work, and it created a lot of disharmony in the organization. And I thought, there's really got to be a better way for organizations and families to coexist. And at the same time, I thought that I wanted to have a family, and certainly there was a way that I could do this where I could be and have work and have a family at the same time in a much better way. So I went back to school and I started studying work and family, and then I not only studied it but lived it as I became an academic, while simultaneously my husband and I had 3 children that I've raised. So I not only study work, family balance, but I live it.
Live it as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Don. Byron, why do you do what you do, and how do you have a sense of calling, vocational calling about it?
Yeah. I was raised in a religious home, and my dad was a professor. And it was just understood that I would go to graduate school like my brothers and sisters and probably wind up being a professor. And I was studying sociology and criminology. And one of the things that, as a believer, I was always surprised that I never got to read any articles on religion, the connection to religion, especially as it related to something like crime and delinquency or rehabilitation. And so I thought, I know religion's relevant. And so I remember telling my major professor that I wanted to study religion, and he thought, that's a deal breaker right there, because you're never going to get promoted. There's nothing on the topic. And I said, that's why I want to do something on it. So that was back in the Paleolithic era. And but about 30 years since then, a whole literature has emerged. And now there are scholars all over the world doing this kind of research that largely kind of got launched in the mid-1980s. And so I didn't know at the time that it would be policy relevant. And so that has been a real a boost to know that the research could actually do some good, and that policymakers would want to get their hands on data that might show that there's a better way to do things and maybe save money at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Byron, let me stay with you for this next question. There are 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States. Why do your craft at Baylor? Why are you at Baylor? Why come here?
Well, I remember when I was at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'd do a study, and the results would show that God makes a difference in a positive way, and I'd always get in trouble. And I kept thinking, if I could, I prayed about this, if I could just do a study that showed that God was evil, that would really help a lot. But the results just kind of kept coming out positive. And I remember when I was asked to give a lecture here at Baylor, and it turned into a job offer. And I thought, well, why would I want to come to Baylor? I mean, I'm in the Ivy Leagues. And, but they asked me to pray on it, and the more I prayed on it, God changed my heart, and the desire to be a part of a great Christian university that aspired to be a great research university. It really got to me, and I wanted to be a part of it. And I think that's why so many people have come to Baylor, is to be a part of a great mission like that.
Dwayne, you joined us very recently. Why is Baylor your home?
I think one of the things that's very similar in some ways that I see at Baylor is that there's an aspiration here. There's a quality to the people that are here that's very solid. And I've been at a lot of secular institutions, and I've done reasonably well there, and I'm comfortable there. But coming here and experiencing Baylor on my visits when I was interviewing, there was something that was just different about this institution. And that aspirant quality really attracted me, wanting to be not just a Christian institution, but to really set its goals very, very high and say, we want to be a top tier. We want to be, a really good, a great research institution. And on top of that, to tenaciously hold on to teaching as a mission. And so bringing those two together, most institutions just say, nah, they really don't go together. But here, we're really trying to make them not only go together, but to raise them up both in very high profile. And I would also say that I love building programs, and Baylor is an environment, it's like a soil that is very rich for planting and building.
So well conveyed, and of course Baylor is at a very special moment now in terms of thinking about our future and building programs that will help move us further in the direction of building scholarship and research capacity and capabilities while maintaining that strong faith commitment and also our commitment to undergraduate education, the strong teaching as well, as you mentioned, Dwayne. Beverly, why Baylor? Why is this your home?
Well, you're hearing a lot about energy, and that energy around Baylor has been attractive to me and still is attractive to me. I was very happily teaching in a theological school. I've done that my whole career, so I didn't have quite the same challenges that you've heard about. And I assumed I would be there until I retired. But the opportunity to join what I think is an outstanding New Testament faculty, especially, and pursue work with graduate students with that group of colleagues was very attractive to me. And there was also the possibility of teaching undergraduates, which I had done very rarely and many years ago, and see if I could still do that. So it's a late career challenge that I've enjoyed very much.
We're so glad you're here. Dawn, lastly, among us here on this stage at least, you've been here the longest. You spent almost all of your career here at Baylor, and you're at the same time one of our very strongest and most prolific researchers. Why have you, frame the question a little differently, why have you remained at Baylor?
Well, like my colleagues, I like the combination of research and teaching being valued simultaneously with the Christian mission. I also have an undergrad affiliation. My dad went here, my brother went here, my mother went here. But the one unique aspect for my decision to stay here is that I think Baylor also offered me the opportunity to live out a balanced work-family life. So when I interviewed here 18 years ago, I was pregnant, very pregnant, and with my firstborn, and I saw the likes of Linda Livingstone, who was part of the group who hired me, so blame her, part of the group who hired me, and she was married and raising a child herself and doing well in her work environment and in a very supportive kind of environment that allowed me to not only achieve as a scholar, but achieve as a mother and a family member. And now my daughter is a freshman at Baylor, and I was able to balance that, and the culture that Baylor had created around allowing that kind of environment was great.
And the family tradition continues.
And the family tradition continues.
Dwayne, there's a popularly held view throughout much of American society, and even in some corners of academia, that faculty conduct research in almost splendid isolation of students. Research and scholarship is to be done away from students. And I know from our interactions that you certainly don't believe that. How do you involve students in your own research?
I taught my very first Baylor freshman class last spring, and I remember going through about halfway through my section of the class, I just asked people, how many here have done research? And actually out of a class, these were honor students, about 30 students total, about 10 students had done some kind of research engagement. And I offered them the opportunity. I said, I want you to come and participate in helping me set up my laboratory and help me further my research. And I had 15 students who were clamoring at my door, or at least my email inbox, to do research. And I was tickled to death. To me, research is in the sciences. It is just fundamentally the best way to teach what science is all about. And for me, then, having students come into my lab and hand them a stack of papers in which they can and say, go and read these things and we'll talk about them. And then we meet one-on-one and talk about how these discoveries were made. And then we try to challenge the student. What are you going to do? What contribution can you make in creating some new knowledge, something that we didn't already know? And
Do you think that's the appeal of the student likewise?
I think that they're excited to do something that's new, yes. It's one of those engagement activities that I think every student really gets excited about.
To be deeply engaged in their own learning.
Yes.
Yeah. Byron,
Yeah.
how about you? How do you involve students in your research?
Yeah. Mainly students come to me. You know, they read something that's of interest, and then they contact me to see if there's a way in which they could be a part of it. And I think that way Baylor's different too, that they would, you know, take that initiative to come see you to see if they can get plugged into a project. That's one way it happens. And then, of course, we also get to work with grad students and postdoctoral scholars. And whether it's postdocs, grad students, or undergrads, I think that the mentoring piece is huge. I was the beneficiary of mentoring, and it changed my whole career. And so the opportunity to invest in other people like that can be life-changing. And I think that's another thing that kind of separates Baylor from other places.
Beverly, tell us how you see your research as benefiting society.
Well, Byron has already spoken about his research and how it shows the flourishing of religion. It's also true that religion can be twisted and distorted in ways that are very very unproductive. The Bible can be read in constructive and illuminating ways, and the Bible can be read in ways that have very harmful effects. For example, in the 19th century, there were many scholars who wrote about the Bible and how it supported slavery. We know the Bible has been used to support the oppression of women. And so one of the things that I think many of us try to do is to counteract that, to demonstrate that these are distorted readings, and to lift up more positive readings, more constructive ways of thinking about Scripture and about our religious traditions.
It's wonderful, thank you. Byron, I suspect from your introduction earlier, we can anticipate one of the ways in which you might answer this question, thinking about the Angola studies that you had over those previous 5-year period. In what ways do you see your research, your scholarship as benefiting society?
Well, I think that for a lot of fields, especially in the social and behavioral sciences, religion's been overlooked. So we're way behind where we need to be in terms of scholarship. So 30 or 40 years ago, there really weren't that many studies that showed the interaction between religion and physical and mental health. And so we've come a long way, but we're still really far behind. So I think there's so much more that we can do. One of our new projects that we're working on is assessing the impact of religion for the global common good. So how does religion affect education? You know, how does it affect civic engagement and volunteerism and these kinds of things? And then how could you quantify it? So the short name of that project is Faithonomics.
Faithonomics.
A takeoff on the book Freakonomics. So that we can, you know, measure the good work that's being done, like, for example, with disaster relief. It's been this unbelievable faith-based response that most people have no idea. Just like the homelessness study that we found that faith-based agencies respond in overwhelming numbers, but it's typically not recognized. So we just feel a responsibility, especially here at Baylor, to highlight that kind of work and to document it as well as we possibly can so people can understand the impact that faith can have for good, even though we know, as Beverly mentioned, there's the other side of that equation. But I think all of these things need to be studied.
So faith is a public good and not merely as a private good.
Yeah, even Bob Putnam from Harvard University, who wrote the book Bowling Alone on the demise of social capital, has come out to say fully half of all social capital in America is tied up in houses of worship. It's spiritual capital. And of course, when he first wrote that book, no one knew that the religion would be that important of a variable in explaining civic engagement in American life. Just another indication of how it's been overlooked.
This project, therefore, one that's not only analytically oriented, but also empirically oriented.
Yeah. I think that for me, I'm a number cruncher. My favorite book of the Bible, Beverly, is Numbers.
We need to talk.
I see deep collaboration emerging even here. Dawn, one of Baylor's historic and current distinctives, an aspect of our university, of our culture, that truly sets us apart is the deep and abiding emphasis this university has long placed on excellence in teaching. How does your research enrich your teaching?
I use research in all kinds of manners for teaching. For example, I look to the latest research available on neuroscience, and there's a great deal of information that neuroscience gives to leadership, for example, and so I'm able to bring in the neuroscience literature and teach leadership in a way that's cutting edge. A recent study out of Harvard on diversity looked at it, the children's game. Guess who? Were you trying to guess the difference? And looked at diversity and discrimination, and I can use that in the classroom to bring up the points about diversity, and then use that to launch into other things about selection and performance appraisals and reviews and those kind of things, and how we need to reduce bias and those matters. And I also, usually more often with executive, bring in my own work, family research, and give people strategies for coping, people strategies for managing work-life balance, and reminding them how to prioritize and different things they can do. So for example, one of my favorite one is outsourcing. And to my husband in the audience, we are outsourcing dinner tonight.
Thank you. Dwayne, what do you think of in this context? How does your research enrich your teaching?
One, it makes it a lot more energetic. I can get really excited in the classroom, and people sometimes think that I'm just on some kind of amphetamine, I don't know. But I really...
This is good to clear that up.
I really think that research informs to such a degree that I can make whatever the topic is, the subject at hand, so much more dramatic for the student. It becomes a great teaching opportunity and tool, because I can tell them directly, this is what really happens, contrary to what the book may say. And they are enthralled because, yes, they can read the book, but in reality, it happens this way. Or maybe we don't really understand. The book makes it seem like we understand this particular process. But in reality, there are all of these questions that are unanswered. And so it kind of opens their mind. And instead of it being this closed state of facts, it becomes a world that's open to curiosity and to questions. That's how research informs my teaching.
It's wonderful. Is there one particular aspect of your teaching portfolio? Is there a particular class or a particular aspect of your teaching that lends itself more so to that very dynamic, that you find in teaching students there's more opportunity there to open the world up to them rather than to convey that the answers are already known on the basis of research and research findings?
Well, I would say that if there's any one thing, it would be things that are related to kind of mechanisms and process within a given subject, whatever that is. It could be metabolism. It could be how the blood-brain barrier. It could be on society, eating and hunger mechanisms. All of those relate.
Speaking of engaging and involving students more deeply in their own learning, Dawn, I'm turning to you. You found some powerful ways of engaging students in the community. Tell us a bit about your efforts in that area.
Great. We have a project as part of the graduate class that I teach, in which the students are in groups and they find organizations to go into. They find them, I don't find them for them, and sometimes in Waco, sometimes throughout the state. And they go into these organizations and do an analysis of the organizations with regard to how they're using their human capital. So they do interviews, they do survey data, they do comparative analysis, all kind of different things. And then they give feedback to the organizations in response at the end to say, these are ways that we can that you can do to help your organization develop, to help humans flourish, to help improve your human capital in your organization. And so they're involved in all kinds of organizations, from big hospitals to Shorty's Pizza to the World Hunger Farm to all kinds of different organizations. And so the community gets feedback. This is especially helpful with small to medium-sized organizations that can't get it other ways. And they get feedback, and the students get that real-world experience of being in actual organizations dealing with actual problems and people.
And solving problems in the context of a particular organization's needs. These are MBA students, is that correct?
These are MBA students, yes.
Byron, how do you involve students in the community in developing skills and also perhaps helping organizations outside of Baylor itself?
Well, if you don't mind, I would like to go back and tackle the question you asked of Dwayne. Of course. Because I've kind of already tackled that one a little bit, because when I was getting excited hearing you give that response. And for us, one of the things that we're able to do is to take existing theories and have them rethought, because we're adding new ideas that haven't been thought of. So you're testing life course theory, but now, and people look at turning points in life like marriage or having children that completely change one's trajectory. But what about a religious conversion? Or what about an identity transformation that happens as a result of something in the faith journey? And now we're rethinking life course theory altogether based on faith. And we're doing this with a number of different theories. And if you're able to bring that into the classroom, not only are they getting something that's cutting edge, they're getting something that faculty from Baylor are part of, that are causing us to rethink something that we've been teaching for years. I think this is really exciting. And of course, we get excited about it. And of course, we get excited about it. I think it really helps the students as well.
Thank you. As President Livingstone has reminded us, Baylor is called to be a world-class research university. I'll begin with Dr. Simmons, with Dwayne. What would it mean to you and to the world for Baylor to achieve its aspirations in terms of developing even deepened impact as a preeminent research university?
I've been associated with a lot of secular institutions, and they are great places to be. However, at all of those institutions, religion and faith are thought to be something that you do in private, and something that should not ever be brought up into the context of discussion at faculty meetings or anywhere thereabouts. Being at Baylor and having Baylor aspire to be a top research institution really would show, I think, that one can be a Christian, one can be faithful, and a very strong academic. And that is a perspective that a lot of people in the secular institutions don't have. It used to be, many hundreds of years ago, that Christianity and university were synonymous, that the search for truth was done through Christianity and yet was a natural kind of output of also the university, and they were together. And then something happened, especially in this country, but actually in Western society, maybe 100 years ago or so, and that is that Christianity pulled away from the university, and the university went in a more secular direction without its Christian partner. What Baylor is doing is rethinking that and saying, we're putting that back together again, and we're going to be an institution where one's Christianity and faith are as important as the academic work you're doing, and we can do both together. That, to me, is inspirational. It is why I joined the faculty here. It is something that I am excited to be a part of.
Beverly, what does it mean to you? What do you see as the advantages or the benefits of Baylor more fully achieving its aspirations to become a Tier 1 university?
My response is much like Dwayne's. I think that there is this perception in the land that at a Christian or any religious college or university, things are kind of constricted, right? One can only ask certain kinds of questions and give certain kinds of answers. And of course, there are people for whom that's a good thing. You know, we'll celebrate being narrow and afraid, and there are people who reject that because they see it as narrow. And I think we're in the process of demonstrating that we can ask all sorts of hard questions and follow our intellect, which is God-given, wherever it takes us, but simultaneously be people who are committed to our own faith traditions, that the life of the mind can flourish and does flourish in this context.
Wonderful. Byron?
Yeah, I was just going to say Baylor is really wonderful because there's debate here. There are campuses where debate is restricted these days, and we see it happening all the time. So I think the aspiration to be a Tier 1 research university that's faith-based is outstanding. Everywhere I go, people say to me, I hear all these things happening at Baylor. It's really exciting. And people saying, we're pulling for Baylor because the tendency is to become secular, not to double down on the mission. And so I think, this is a great experiment, and people are looking far and wide, not just here in the U.S., but around the world, to see if we can fulfill that vision. And I think, the four of us came here to make sure that we do.
Dawn, you'll have the final word on this topic, and all final words today.
I concur with my colleagues, and I'd just like to build on that to say that by creating this unique environment, it brings us to the table. It brings a Christian perspective to the table of decision making, to the table of policy making, to the table of scholarship, that we can have an impact. We can have an impact on lots and lots of people beyond simply the walls of Baylor, because we're creating such outstanding scholarship here. And I also think that, and I'm sure you guys see it as well, that people are starting to notice and come to Baylor because of that reason. When we're recruiting, people are like, oh, I want to work with the likes of Beverly, I want to work with the likes of Byron, whatever, and they come, and it's from a selection, from a recruiting standpoint, it's they want to come and be part of something that's so unique and so special, but very, very high quality. and it's a great place to be.
Thank you, Dawn. Well, on that note, I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. Conversations such as these are invaluable to the robust intellectual life of our climate here at Baylor University. And today we've highlighted 4 of the finest faculty on campus who study very different dimensions of the human condition. I hope you leave with a new imagination about Baylor and how Baylor is engaged in a greater conversation, one that advances the understanding of the conditions under which human beings can flourish. And I hope, most of all, that you'll join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. in the Federal Center as we officially install Dr. Linda Livingstone as our 15th president. What a tremendous honor it is to serve alongside each of you, the members of our panel, and all of you in the audience as we together continue to move Baylor forward. I thank you. Good night.